Good morning, everyone. I'll be very brief because I know you're about to launch into these incredibly important meetings. First thing, most important thing is thank you. Thank you for the work you do. It matters. We've watched over the last couple of years as we've gotten some relatively good news on the budget side, and I think that has to do with many things, but it certainly has to do with the way that you and other groups like you supporting our endowment and other interests in the arts and the humanities and culture have made the case here on the Hill. So what you're doing today really matters. You need to go into those offices, as somebody said, with a lot of confidence, a lot of energy, and an understanding that this can change things. So thank you for being here, and thank you for your extraordinary work. I want to also thank Bob and the great organization that he represents and leads. Nothing quite like it in the country. No other organization quite like this. We deeply appreciate the work that they do and their extraordinary energy and impact out in the public sphere. My good colleague Jane Chu mentioned, it's not too late to mention it again, that the two endowments are celebrating their 50th anniversaries this year. September 29th, 1965, Lyndon Johnson signed that extraordinary piece of legislation in the midst of all that other extraordinary legislation that was part of that time. What an amazing era and what an amazing accomplishment. Over that period of time, about $11 billion coming for those two endowments out into the sphere of arts and culture in this country. These two endowments were born together, separated at birth, but we have been working in many of the same vineyards over the subsequent 50 years, especially for the NEH in the museum field. About $750 million since 1965 from the NEH have gone to the museum sector in this country. Some 2,500 grants, some $250 million of that $750 million for exhibitions alone, and many, many other grants to museums all over the country supporting all kinds of projects, both in infrastructure and in exhibitions. We started our work in the public sphere, in fact, in museums. Some of you will recall, or some of you will have heard about the extraordinary Tutankhamun, the Treasures of Tutankhamun exhibit that started in New York in the late 1970s and went around the country, the first big blockbuster museum program in the country, and NEH was the principal funder of that program. Since then, we've been very involved in museums all over the United States. It's a hugely important part of our work, and we're deeply proud of that work and also proud to be engaged with the National Endowment for the Arts in that incredibly important enterprise. But what you're doing today and what you're talking about today is not just about the past, even though that past has been enormously important for the culture of the United States, as a number of people have said. It's also about the future, and in a couple of different ways. I grew up in Birmingham, Michigan, a suburb of Detroit, in the Michigan, in the 1950s. This was the time, the great heroic era of American industrial capitalism. It's the time and it was the place that built the automobile industry. It was very much a similar time in places like Buffalo and Pittsburgh and Cleveland. And it was an extraordinary time in this country's economic history. But we all know what happened to that industry and industries like it in this country. And we all know what's happened since to these once great cities of Buffalo and Cleveland and Detroit, Baltimore, other places like it. But what's happening now is extraordinarily interesting. I went back to Detroit earlier this winter in February, and I spent a lot of time looking at the cultural scene in Detroit, and I was so pleased and so proud to see that at the very heart of the renaissance that's going on in these cities is the art and cultural community. They are the leading edge of this renaissance that's going on in Detroit, that's going on in Cleveland, that's going on in Baltimore, that's going on all over the country. We are the leaders of that extraordinary rebirth that's happening, and that's extraordinarily wonderful to see. I grew up going to the Detroit Institute for the Arts, that extraordinary museum in downtown Detroit. I spent many happy days there as a kid looking at that extraordinary collection. To go back there now and to see this institution reaching out in brand new ways to that community and being engaged in that community is extraordinarily moving and extraordinarily important. So as you think about the work that you're doing today, and as you think about what you're saying to these very important people making policy in this country, think about that and talk about that, and talk about how important these organizations are to the future of these cities that are finding a new life and a new birth in a brand new age. But the other and last thing I'd like you to keep in mind is this. The arts are important in this country not simply because they provide a kind of leading edge to this cultural renaissance. And they are not important simply because they are part of this new economic engine that John Maeda talked about last night, the technological sector in this country, which is creating a whole new economic revolution in the United States and around the world, though it is very important because of that. Finally, the arts are most important of all, and they're most meaningful to us of all because they help us understand our own experience. And they are the path, they are the channel, they are the means we have of getting to the truth of our experience. Listening to this extraordinary poetry that we heard this morning, I couldn't help but thinking about what's been happening in this country for the last year and a half. It's been a tough year and a half on the issue of race relations. But to understand what we've been through and to understand where we need to go, we need the truth of art, because it's that truth that helps us understand the future. So it's not just about the economy. It's not just about technology. It's not just about design. And it's not just about civic renaissance. It's also about our own experience and understanding that experience and empowering us to be different and to create a new and different kind of country. That's why we need the arts. And that's why, in addition to advocating in the ways that you do this morning for the arts in every part of the United States and in every community, we need to be thinking about the most fundamental question of all is how are we educating our young people to live whole, significant, consequential lives and to be able to deal with the problems that they're going to have to deal with to make this country as great as it possibly can be. The real bottom line in this is our aspirations for education and our aspirations for the way in which culture serves the fundamental needs of the people of the United States. So that's what's at stake, and that's the message that I hope you carry out into these offices, that you take back into your communities. Because getting back to the notion of educating the whole person for whole lives, for meaningful civic lives, is the real prize that's out there waiting for us with a renewed commitment, a renewed national commitment to arts and culture. Thank you very much and have a great day.